Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I'm joined by an accidental teacher, an accidental librarian, and a purposeful community organizer whose work has appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Lightspeed Magazine, beneath Ceaseless Skies, Asimov's, and Uncanny Valley. His novels include the urban fantasy trilogy, The Knights of Breton Court, the steampunk novel Pimp My Airship, and the middle grade detective novel The Usual Suspects, which I actually have a copy right here. That's right, it's your favorite writer and mine, Maurice Broaddus. Maurice, how the heck are you?
I am fine. Tired, but fine.
Yeah, tired. So yeah, you just what was it last week? Last weekend, you just wrapped up another legendary MoCon. Can you tell people who don't know, I guess what year is this so far, and like how did it start? And just
Let's
yeah, tell people
see.
even what it is for those who don't know.
Yeah, we started doing the math on it, and it was like because we did the first MoCon back in 2006. So I guess next year will be our 20th anniversary of doing MoCons, which is terrifying to think about. MoCon, it's basically me. It's the Maurice convention. There's no point in me dancing around it. I'm the Mo of MoCon. And so, but it started actually as believe it or not, it started as a church ministry. At the time, I was helping plant a church, and the pastor was just like, "Hey, can you think of ways to do ministry that's outside the box?" Da, 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 da. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm your guy for outside the box thinking." And so I said, "How about I have a friend, his name's Brian Keene. How about if we bring him in and he can do a sermon on his non-belief in God, and we can build a whole church service around it?" And he was like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, trust me, it'll be fine." Um, so we brought in Brian. A bunch of our friends showed up. Plus, my wife would always want to know what goes on at these writers' conferences that you go to. Like, well, honey, I got you. We'll do it and we'll host it out of our house. Um, so, so everybody came in. We hung out all day Saturday. Sunday comes around. My wife's walking through the house and she's like, "Man, it's like a bomb went off at a writers' conference because there's just bodies all over the place because we just slept where we dropped." And so, but then that evening we did a whole service. Brian spoke. Me and him ended up in conversation. The pastor was stunned by how well it all went. And then he's like, "Hey, could you do it bigger next year?" And I was like, "Bigger next year? Well, I have a friend named Wrath, so yeah, we can definitely go bigger."
Well,
Uh,
how many people were there that first year? Do you remember like thereabouts?
yeah, so I mean, it was a small thing because we had a because the pastor was so terrified of the idea of this thing, he didn't even tell the church about it. And so because here's his fear because it was a new church and we were already gaining a reputation, so he didn't want us to be seen as this rogue out there woo woo church and everything, which actually translated it to he didn't want the conservative people who give money to the church to show up and be freaked out by what we're doing, right? So he did not advertise this thing at all. And the closest he came was, "Hey, tonight, if you guys see some cars around the building, Maurice is doing a thing," and that was pretty much it. And so, but then, so we had about 20 members of the congregation showed up, and then plus like the dozen or so friends of ours from out of town. Um, but it included the most conservative family at the church. They showed up at the event, and then after Brian talked about his non-belief in God, and after me and him had a conversation about the nature of faith and struggling with faith and everything, the wife raises her hand and she just like, "Look, I never thought of church as a safe place to have these conversations because where Brian's at is where I'm at in my faith," and that just told me, "Hey, we're on the right track, I think, with what we're doing." So yes, we had about 20 to 40 people at that first one. And then we and the first 10 years of MoCon, we did it in a variety of different churches. So we did it for about 10 years. Then I retired MoCon after that. Um, then after we missed a year, a bunch of folks got at me and were just like, "Hey, can you bring it back?" And I'm like, "No, we can't. I don't want to go through and do all that." But I'll tell you what, me and my wife will be at home the same weekend, so y'all are free to stop by. And we'll call it NoCon. And then we had about 40 or 50 people showed up, and like half of them ended up pitching tents in our backyard. It was a crazy. This is like oh man, I can't even think of a comparison for it. It's like Woodstock for horror writers, basically. Everybody just run around my house and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, at this rate, we could just do MoCon again. So I brought it back. And then yeah, we've just been. I think we've had 2 gap years and two no con years. The second gap year was because of COVID, and then the year after COVID, we had a no con year. But then other than that, it's been MoCon every year. But when we brought it back as more community facing. So it's out in more community spaces, not so much locked in churches. And so like even like with this past weekend, we had about 6 different community organizations come together to help support it and put it on. Like the Kheprw Institute where I work, and the AMP where we held all of our festivities, Flanner House with the Ujamaa bookstore. We did events there. So we did events over at a place called the Ritz, which is owned by the Learning Tree or Learning Tree and Roots International. Just to we just had basically part of my things I also want to showcase like local artists, local creatives, as well as, hey, this is Indianapolis. I'm proud of Indianapolis. Here's some of the stuff that we have going on in Indianapolis at the community level. Here's some of our local artists we'll feature. And so yeah, it's just a great mix of like local artists, hanging out with, nationally renowned artists, as it were, just hanging out for a whole weekend. It's basically BarCon as a whole weekend. Think of it that way.
Nice.
Plus I feed everybody.
Well, even better. So if
Right.
like next year, if that's something that people want to go to, I mean, at what point do you have, or is there already like a website or something up for next year? I mean, what time do people need to start kind of keeping an eye out for that type of stuff?
Let's see. I'll probably have thought through everything by October. So about October, November, up on my website, MauriceBroaddus.com. There's a MoCon tab, and we'll just start putting it out there.
Very nice. So, before we get into everything else, you have a Wikipedia page, as I'm sure you know. And anytime people have Wikipedia pages, I like to do kind of like a Rich Eisen celebrity true or false with some of the information on there. So,
Okay.
so one of those is that you were born in London. True or false?
That is true. That is true. Me and my brother were born in London.
So is that, can you like what was that situation like? Do you have like dual citizenship or you just happen to
Mm.
be, your parents just happen to be there?
Nope. Right now I have dual citizenship. Actually, if I filled out some paperwork, I could actually have triple citizenship because my mother's from Jamaica. And
Oh,
so Jamaican citizenship is passed down maternally. So I could actually have a third citizenship if I really wanted to.
so how long were you in London?
You know what? I was only there for about 6 years. And then we moved from from London, England to Franklin, Indiana, where my father's from. So I was old enough to recognize the transition between, what's that, the 10th largest city in the world and Franklin, which is not.
Yeah. But so I imagine at that point you had a British accent, right? Like how long did it take you to eventually you know, to kind of lose that?
Did I mention Franklin, Indiana, where
So like
it would
day
come up
two,
to
day
right,
three?
exactly, because you can only hear as a 6-year-old, you can only hear someone go, "Hey, talk English for us," so many times before you're like, you know what, I'm over this. So yeah, it was not long between both me and my brother, both intentionally lost our accents as fast as possible.
Do you ever go back? I mean, like if you were to go back to London, would you find yourself just all of a sudden having an accent? The same thing with like Jamaica. Like have you ever been
Uh,
down there? Do you ever start speaking with
yeah.
a Jamaican accent?
I actually, so I've come to realize how you're hearing me now is how I sound at all times. So
Mhm.
there is that. I've only been back to England once. Although the goal is me and my family are looking to go there in October of this year, actually, because my boys, since citizenship's passed down paternally, they now have British passports and everything. So we're looking at doing a trip to England later on this year. So because they've never been, and and I still got family over there that I want to, see and have them meet and everything. So got that. Now Jamaica, we've been, let's see, I think only I've been back to Jamaica over the course of my lifetime, probably about 15 times, but only a couple times in the last decade or so. So
Yeah.
it gets a little harder when you have wife and boys, and the trips become a little pricier as opposed to when I'm single and can just pop down.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, another one is that you earned your Bachelor's of Science in biology from Purdue and worked for 2 decades as an environmental toxicologist.
Mostly true.
Oh,
Um,
uh-oh, Wikipedia. Got to get
right,
updated.
right. Well, because my degree does technically say Purdue University. It's just I actually went to, it was called, at the time it was a IUPUI, so Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. Although in the last year or so, there's a great divorce. So now that it's IU Indianapolis and Purdue Indianapolis now, as separate campuses here in town. But yes, I went to school here in Indianapolis. Um, yeah, got my degree in biology because my mother did not want to, what'd she say? I need you to major in something respectable, as opposed to being a creative writer, which is what I was going to major in. So our compromise was science. So I have a degree in biology. And then yeah, I fell into a job actually during school. And then when I graduated, they hired me full time, and I was an environmental toxicologist for 20 years, coinciding with when Knights of Breton Court came out. As a matter of fact, that's about when the job ended.
What did that job entail mostly? I mean,
Yeah,
what's like in layman's terms, like what were you doing most of the
yeah,
time?
yeah. So I mean, it sounds fancy, environmental toxicologist. But in layman's terms, I did a water quality testing. So anyone who dumped water into any sort of stream, creek, river of any sort, we basically test what they were dumping, see if its impact on the fish and stuff in the area, and then if it was bad, we would have recommendations for what they could do to treat the problem.
So would you just travel like all over the country, or were you mostly in like one area of the country for that?
Oh yeah. So here's the thing about me. Even though I was an environmental toxicologist, I actually don't like outside. So they had to bring the environment to me. So the
Okay, you
water
weren't getting the
samples.
samples. You were
No, no.
just
They
testing
could
them or
ship me
whatever.
right.
Okay.
I just test them. They had to get me the sample. They had to take a sample and get it to me within 24 hours, and then after that, I would do the testing.
I see. Okay. Okay. So, but you said that, what you really wanted to do was creative writing.
Mhm.
As we all know now in our later years, that's always such a foolish endeavor to want to do. But
Right, right.
so I mean, at what point do you remember like when you were like a kid, or how old were you when you really started getting that bug? Were you really digging, reading and telling
Yeah.
stories and maybe even started, writing your own stories?
Well, there's two answers to that. So one, like I said, when I was 6 and came to America, they also didn't know what grade to put me in. And a 6-year-old, I think that's what, first grade or something. Oh no, I think it was kindergarten actually. I was supposed to go into kindergarten. They skipped me into second grade. They knew that they probably should have put me in third grade, but they were just like, look, you're already the smallest and youngest person in the class, and frankly, the only black student in the class. So you're going to have a host of social issues as it is. So we can't we would feel bad if we skipped you ahead again. So they left me in the second grade class. And the teacher, she literally just gave me a stack of paper and set me in the back of the room, just like, just write stuff this year. And so here I am at 6 year old. I'm thinking, ooh, the American school system is great. Uh, because I literally, all I
Little
did
did you
was,
know.
little did I know. By the time, I mean, I wrote poems, I wrote short stories, I created these prayer books. So I did all these sort of things over the course of the year. Mrs. Rainey, I will never forget her. It just let me just create all stuff. So I didn't realize at the time I'm developing this discipline of writing, this love of writing. But that gets married to the whole idea of like my mother being from Jamaica would always regale us with all these folklore tales. Right? So, she'd have all these duppy stories. So there's ghosts everywhere. She has a duppy for every occasion, basically. Something gets moved in the house. Oh, a duppy did it. So we had that. She would talk about different creatures from the Iron Root Tree Folk, Roland Calf, just different creatures from Jamaican folklore, Brer Anansi. Um, Old Hinge, which is a terrifying figure when you because it's kind of like a vampire type figure. It hangs out in like a certain type of tree and in its branches, but at night it would take off its skin to go haunt people. And I'm like, whoa, this is something you. I'm looking back and I'm like, you would tell me these stories as kids. These are like our bedtime stories. Like, all right, someone ripped off their skin, went and haunted people. All right, good night, kids. So like, all right. So you had all these things going on. I'm just like, but again, but she said this is how we transmit culture. And so we said like we didn't have TV, we didn't have cable, we didn't have internet. We told stories to one another. And so that was her way of passing down her culture to me and my brother. And at some point it got embedded in me.
Yeah. But what point did you start like really trying to get published? I mean, was it with short stories? And at the same time,
Mm,
I mean, right now, I don't know, like what would you call yourself? Would you call yourself more of a science fiction writer over fantasy? Or I mean, like, do you, I mean, I don't know, like, or do you have a preference
yeah,
on terms of like if you had
yeah.
to pick one type of genre, which would that be?
See, in fact, for a while, I used to just say I'm a speculative fiction writer because I would cover science fiction, horror, and fantasy. But then I started writing middle grade detective novels. I'm just like, oh, I'm a writer. That's what I am. I'm a writer, and I'm moved by whatever story I want to tell, um, whatever opportunity has arisen. If there's a writing challenge, that's whatever stirs my creative passions. That's what I'm going to write about, basically. As far as first getting published, well, because but in fifth grade, I got an honorable mention in a citywide essay contest. By the time I was a senior in high school, the teachers were giving me special assignments because they were like, "No, we get it. You're a writer." And so our assignments are. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I would tell the story about how my teachers would, give me the special curriculum and blah 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 for because of my writing ability. But as a teacher, uh, I recognize this because I tell this to my students. I'm like, look, most classes are paced for the slowest student when all said and done. Um, And so if you're one of those students that get your work done early, the rest of the time to just goof off. And so what had happened is my teachers would give us these 15-page essay assignments and give us like 3 weeks to get it done. Like I did it the next day. So I now have 3 weeks to just play. And so they could not just let me just play and distract other students and everything. So suddenly I have a special curriculum to keep me busy. Um, but then in college, I'd quit writing because my mom wants me to do the blah blah blah, and so I've kind of quit writing, and that lasts for about 2 years, and then it's like, all right, nope, I have to write. So then I start writing on the side, as it were, while I do have the degree in biology, I have an undeclared major in English because of all the creative writing classes I took in college. And I bring that up only because my last class was an independent studies course. And that's a course where you just paired with a professor just randomly. And so I'm sharing with the professor, hey, I'm drawn to write horror stories. This is what I want to do. Um, I lay out, kind of ideas are percolating in my head. And then he's just like, did you research me before you took this class? And I'm like, no, they paired me up randomly. And he goes, that's odd because I did my dissertation on Stephen King and Clive Barker. And I'm just like, oh, I am where I am meant to be. And so that was the professor who introduced me to magazines like Cemetery Dance and said, hey, if you're going to be published, and he gave me the big three for me to try and get into. He said, I want Cemetery Dance, magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and and Asimov. He said those were the ones he said he wanted me to get into. And in fact, by the end of that class, I received an honorable mention in the Isaac Asimov undergraduate award. So I'd received that award by the time I left school. Um, so yeah, so that's literally what got me into the whole idea of like trying to get published. And then over the course of my career, my goals were to get published, especially in those three magazines. And then when I got into Asimov's, Sheila Williams, when I bumped into her at a conference, she pulled me aside and goes, "We actually remember you from when you won that honorable mention in our contest. So that's how long we've been
Wow.
tracking you in your career. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, that's nice. So what were you reading prior though that like really kind of initially wanted to do horror and science fiction? Were there certain
Mhm.
authors that really that would really just kind of speak to you?
Yeah. So my big thing. So in high school, it was so it was basically went Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen King, and Neil Gaiman. Those were the ones that got me for that from high school through college. Those were my big readings. But prior to that, my big things were comic books, starting with X-Men. So it was comic books, mythology. I was a huge mythology reader. I was constantly reading mythology, starting in fifth grade. I could not, I couldn't read enough. I was devouring Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Norse, any sort of mythological tale I could find. I was devouring it. And then you know what? The only other person who knew what I was talking about was literally I bumped it was at MoCon with P. Jelly Clark because he was just like, "Did anyone else read Danny Dunn Mysteries?" And I'm like, "Yes." Danny Dunn Mysteries was my favorite. Like as a kid, those are my favorite things to read. I read all the Danny Dunn mystery books. He was this child scientist. He was a scientist detective, and I just love those books. I mean, they objectively made very little sense, but I devoured those books. I went from them to like Encyclopedia Brown, but it was the Danny Dunn mysteries I just could not get enough of, and uh,
Were they because like if I remember correctly, like Encyclopedia Brown were kind of interactive in a way where they wanted you to try to also solve the mysteries.
solve
How
the
were
mystery. Yeah,
those? Was it the same type of thing? Or like were they set up
uh,
differently? It was more just narrative.
they were set up. It was more narrative because, like I said, there was a point where you're just like, yeah, this actually doesn't make sense in terms of any sort of quote unquote mystery that they're trying to solve, especially with all the science hijinks that goes on. But I just love those books.
Yeah. So, of course, your first novel, well, the first published novel, at least, is
Mm,
Kingmaker, which came
hmm
out in 2010.
hmm
Now, was that your first novel, or was that just your first published novel?
My first published novel. It was my fifth novel written.
Oh, wow.
Um, so my first novel, I began right after wrapping up college, and it took me about 7 years to get the first draft done. It was a horror novel called Strange Fruit. I'm trying to remember if I can think of the order of which I wrote these novels because this I didn't realize this was indicative of what my life was going to be like as a writer. So my first novel was a horror novel, Strange Fruit, not published. Will never see the light of day. None of these will see the light of day. My second novel is called Pantheon of Dreams. Looking back now, it would be classified as it would be classified as an urban fantasy novel. Um, Third novel um, was a fantasy novel, sword and sorcery fantasy novel. Um, Black Sun Rising. So that was the fourth novel. No, that was the third novel. The fourth novel was Caught Up, an African American romance novel. So, and
And those
then
do really well too. And so, like, nothing ever came of that
that's
one.
so okay. So here's that story. Um, because yeah, I'd written it for exactly those reasons. Because especially at the time, they were really hot. Because Waiting to Exhale had come out, and my book Caught Up is basically like Waiting to Exhale, except with four dudes. You know. And so we were at World Horror. I think it was World Horror 2005. And me and Wrath James White, we were at a bookstore, going through the books and everything. And then he turns to me and goes, "Man, if we had any sense, we'd write one of these African American romance novels." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, actually, I have written one." And I even chose my pen name. My pen name is Marquis Styles, Styles with a Z. And then he goes real quiet on me and looks at me and goes, "I'm gonna tell Keen." And so then he takes off running at full tilt from the bookstore back to the convention, and I'm running just booking it through, trying to. I'm like, oh no, if I get to Keen, if he gets to Keen first, I'm never gonna hear the end of it. I get to Keen's booth, but by the time I get there, he's standing behind his booth. with one of these, and Wrath is already behind him, and he's like, mm, mm, mm. Marquis Styles, is it? And I'm just like, okay. And have not heard the end of that since.
Well, with that one, I
So yeah,
mean,
so
how
four.
far did
Oh,
it
go ahead.
get into like, had you looked for agents? Were you like trying to find a publisher? I mean, what was that? Because again, I mean, though, I mean, Winning Excel obviously was a huge book, but
Yeah,
even now, I mean, there's like those books sell
yeah.
really well in that type of genre. So, I mean, I don't know. Is there anything you want to like, is Marquise gonna
Oh, no,
have a
yeah.
future somewhere else?
I thought about it, and then I honestly I could not bring myself to pull the trigger on it. I just couldn't. I just like, oh man, if this becomes my hit book, I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, just part of me is just like, I can't do it. I just can't do it. So, so I ended up not doing it. And then I started writing the book that would become Kingmaker, um, which is funny because I tried to it was with me trying to sell Pantheon of Dreams, as a matter of fact, is what led to it because the publisher Ingrid at the time they said we were looking for urban they said urban fantasy novels in the vein of Neil Gaiman. Oh no, the fantasy novels in the name of Neil Gaiman. That's what it was. And so I sent them Pantheon of Dreams, which is basically a police procedural investigating the death of a goddess. And I remember this, to this day when Lee Harris writes back and is just like, yeah, we are taking out that phrase in the vein of Neil Gaiman because we ended up getting, what do you say, like either 5 or 20, I can't remember the exact number, but we got 20 police procedurals investigating the death of a god novels. And
Hmm.
so he's like, do you have anything else? And I'm like, well, I got this one book that's, that's sort of like Excalibur meets The Wire. And he goes, send me some chapters because if you can make that work, I will buy that book. And so here we go.
Nice.
And
Well,
thus
wait, I
where
want
we
to go
are.
back. So,
Yep.
I'm not a big I don't know when it comes to fantasy, like, I'll watch some shows or movies, but I'm not a big, reader of fantasy books for whatever reason. But
Mhm.
that sounds very intriguing about a priest, a police procedural, the death of a goddess.
Mhm.
Like, was that a thing for a while? I mean, is there any like books that stick out to you? Because, or like, or and with any of these other books, have you ever? You said that they're never going to see a light of day, but is there anything in those books that you would try to mine for future works or like trying to
Oh
revisit
yeah.
certain characters?
There was a whole storyline out of the romance book that ended up in Kingmaker, as a matter of fact.
Mm.
So yeah, so absolutely. In fact, I'm still thinking about going back and revisiting the rest of revisiting Pantheon of Dreams because I'm like there are a couple books. In fact, I end up reworking half of Pantheon of Dreams into this basically this young adult or I don't know if it's like young adult novel, but it's basically a coming of age novel with a high school student um, called The Lost Griot. And so yeah, so it's become a thing. So short answer is yes, I do mind some of these books for other things, but I don't think the police procedural thing was a thing per se, because this is like before Once Upon a Time and before what was the other one that was just like a but there was before those shows. It was because two of my favorite comics at the time was Neil Gaiman's Sandman and Alan Moore's Top Ten, which was a police procedural with superheroes.
Hmm.
And so that was the jump off point for my King Arthur and the Hood novel.
Well, so Kingmaker is available now. I mean, so it became a trilogy. At
Hmm.
that point, did you have the idea, like was it initially just going to be a standalone, or did in the back of your head, did you think like, okay, I could probably do another two or three books? Because obviously, a publisher comes to you, and if they want more books, 95% of the time, writers are not going to be like, no, they're going to be like, sure, yeah, we'll do another book. I mean,
Right.
like, how did that process
Well,
kind of go?
as a matter of fact, so I send Lee the first three chapters of the book. He's like, all right, nope, I'm in. Send me the whole thing because this works for me. So he says, send me the thing. And so I sent him the whole novel. He gets done with the novel and he's like, I love the book except for the ending. I hated the ending unless this was like the beginning of a trilogy or something. And I'm like, of course it was the beginning of a trilogy, Lee. What idiot writer would end a book there? Obviously it's the beginning of a trilogy, and by this point, and so he's like, "Oh yeah, can you send me what book a summary for what books 2 and 3 would look like?" And I'm like, "I got you." And by this point, I gotten an agent, and the agent reaches out to me, and goes, "Do you have ideas for book 2 and 3, or should I stall right now?" He goes, and so I said, "Yeah, you may want to stall." So so he stalled for a little bit, and then I worked out some tentative ideas for what books 2 and 3 could look like. I sent him a paragraph synopsis of each book, and then he's like, "Yep, we'll buy a trilogy."
And so what came after the trilogy? Was it yeah, do you remember like I mean at that point because again you talked before that you kind of see yourself more
Mhm.
or at least at that time as a speculative writer because you were kind of like dabbling in different genres and of course we can get into some of your middle grade stuff here where
Yeah,
there is literally no speculative elements.
right,
So um, I mean, like was there a conversation with your agent at the time? Like, because sometimes that's a conversation you just want to have, essentially, like,
right,
like where do you see your career going? Like
right.
what lane do you want to take? I mean, like what were you thinking at that time in
So
terms of just career paths?
so that's the thing. So a when I wrote Kingmaker, I'm still firmly a horror writer at this point. So when I wrote Kingmaker, even though it's a King Arthur tale, to me it was written as a coming of age horror novel.
Mm.
And so when I sold it to Angry Robot, they were like, "Yes, this is a great urban fantasy novel." And I wasn't even familiar with the genre terms at this point. So to my mind, when you said urban fantasy, I just assume it's like urban radio, which is code for black. And so I'm just like, urban fantasy makes sense. Black fantasy, got it. And they're like, no, no, no. We mean it's fantasy that takes place in a city. And I'm like, oh, okay, still works. So I'm now an urban fantasy writer. I didn't set out to be an urban fantasy writer, but now because of the trilogy, I'm an urban fantasy writer. Um, and so I'm just kind of so partly I'm led by the opportunities because after the trilogy comes out, I began talks with a publisher, and he was just like, yeah, the sales weren't quite where I'd like to see them. Da, da, da. So if you were to do another book series, if you do another urban fantasy series, well, we have sales numbers on you, and that's going to impact your next deal. But if you switch genres, we have no numbers on you, so it's almost like a blank slate if you switch genres. And I was like, well, what do you think? And he said, I'd love to see a science fiction novel from you, for example. And I'm like, say less. I'll write you a science fiction novel. So I ended up writing a science fiction novel called Nomad, which again, so I feel like I'm name dropping books are all behind me in my file somewhere, completely unpublished. But I ended up writing Nomad. But at this point, my agent's going through some things, and he's not being real responsive. Um, I try to have the conversation about, is this a good route for me to go? Because I'm going from urban fantasy to science fiction. Because at the time, because like you said, it's like 2010, 2012, around that time. At the time, conventional wisdom is you pick a genre, you stay in that genre, build a name for yourself. That's how you make your career. I think that's kind of shifted these days. But at the time, that's very much what the model for everybody. Um, and so I had written that novel, and then I'd also started writing um, the book that would become Usual Suspects at this time also. So now I've gotten an urban fantasy, a science fiction, and a middle grade detective novel. Um, I end up switching agents at this point. Um, and then and then we do have that conversation, but she's just like, look, you can have here's what you could do. You could have an adult career that goes down one way, and a children's book career that goes a different direction, and that never the twain shall meet, basically. And that's perfectly fine. No one's gonna think twice about that. I'm like, oh, okay. um but like I said, life a bunch of life happens, and we don't actually get a chance to send stuff out until like 2016. And the reason this is important is because like when I wrote Usual Suspects in 2012, I already knew in my head this book is dead on arrival because this is a middle grade book. It has two young black boys as the protagonists. There is no market for this book. Um, but like I said, life happens. Um, we come back in 2016, and well, now the We Need Diverse Books movement has happened.
Mm.
And my agent at the time, because she was still a young agent, and she's like, I've never tried to sell middle grade before, but hey, I'm down for this adventure if you are. And I'm like, look, I'm all about adventure. Let's go. And then a Usual Suspect sells in under 2 weeks. And she's like, hey, I'm now a middle grade agent. This this is the route for me if they're going to go this quick. So yeah, so that's how we did it. But then after that, it's just like and I do lean on my agent to go, all right, here's the moves I'm thinking about making. But now she's just like, and now my current agent, who is basically that agent's best friend, so she was well aware of my antics and my ways. But with both of them, it's just like, no, you write what you want to write. It's our job to worry about selling it. So you do your thing, we'll do our thing.
Yeah, but do you, in the back of your head, like, how much of the marketplace do you kind of keep in the back of your head when you are kind of coming up with ideas? I mean, I'm sure that's conversations that you have with your agent because obviously they want to shop around things that would be, viable.
Mhm.
But I mean, is that something that you stick, or is it very much just like, you know what, my next project, I just want to do this. If we don't sell it, we don't sell it, or like you're like, no,
Right.
I mean, obviously you want to sell it.
Well, no, 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 no. You read the first time. I'm going to write what I want to write. I'm, as you might have picked up by now, I'm perfectly fine with writing a novel and putting it in my files and calling it a day. Um, for because like I really wanted to write a steampunk novel, and it ended up being a Pimp My Airship, for example. But I also knew the market for something like that is very, very small. And so it wouldn't be something that we'd go out, to any of the major presses with or anything like. Actually, I didn't even intend to sell it, to be honest with you. I wrote the novel partly to see if I could take a short story of mine and expand it into a novel. And then my secondary mission, as I have a friend named JJ, and I wanted to see if I could make JJ laugh with this book. So I write this whole novel, Pimp My Airship, send it to JJ. JJ laughs through the whole thing. I'm like, okay, mission accomplished. And it literally goes into my files. And I did with no intentions of me publishing it whatsoever. And it wasn't until I did a podcast, as a matter of fact. And I was on the podcast and they had asked me about what my favorite writer's journey, my favorite hero's journey was. And so I talked about my dude Sleepy from Pimp My Airship. His hero's journey is my dude just wants to get high, and I won't let him. And I have a series of escalating antics that happen to keep him from getting high. Um, and so that's the the rough arc of Sleepy in a lot of ways. Um, and then when the podcast airs, all of a sudden my inbox starts getting pinged with, "Hey, where can we buy that novel? Where can we buy that book?" Da, da, da. And I'm just like, "Uh-oh." 'Cause I can't just say it's in my trunk. And so I reach out to Jason Sizemore, who was the editor who originally published Pimp My Airship, the short story. And he runs Apex Magazine and he runs Apex Books. And I'm like, hey, Jason, because we're friends. I sent him I said, hey, I'm gonna send you some chapters. Can you tell me if I have anything here? And so then he's just like, yep, you got something. We'll take it. I'm like, no, I wasn't submitting it to you. I just want to know if I had a story. He's like, nope, we're calling dibs. And I'm like, I don't think dibs is a legally binding contract by any means in publishing. And he's like, well, that's fine because I just announced that it's coming out next year. So do with that what you will. And so that was how the road to Pimp My Airship started. But also keep in mind, me and Jason are friends. So we would do these sort of antics with each other all the time. So I'm just like, all right, well, if you want it, yeah, we'll go with you because I did think it absolutely perfect that it go full circle back to Jason as a book. But otherwise, it would have just stayed in my trunk because I wrote the thing I say often is like I write for me. So that means I don't write in regards to the market. I don't write in regards to anything other than what is in my brain, what is on my heart. Let me get that out of me. Um, and then once it's written, then I'm like, this thing, then I have a choice. I can either go, I just needed to get it out of me and then put it away, or I can go, well, let's see what the market, let's see if we can find a place for it in the market, and then I'll send it out. But I never feel any sort of obligation to publish everything I write.
Well, what is your writing? I don't say necessarily writing schedule, but I mean, are you trying to write every day, or and when you typically do write, do you usually try to have like a target, like a chapter, like 1,000 words, 2,000 words? I mean, what is like how much do you
Mm,
typically produce over the course of, I don't
yeah.
know, like a week or even a year? I mean,
Mm.
or like
Uh,
or
that
are there days and weeks that go by where you might not actually be sitting down and writing anything at all?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I tell people is like I'm writing all the time, but only sometimes am I putting words on an actual page,
It's the Walter
right?
Mosley thing.
Uh,
Even, just thinking about writing is writing.
is exactly no, and I absolutely adhere to that. And so when people ask me how many words you do a dance, I couldn't even tell you. But I can tell you this: my productivity schedule, by strange coincidence, aligns with when books are due.
Yeah, deadlines are
I
great. Deadlines are great
Deadlines are
motivators.
great. The last couple years, I've had to get 3 to 4 novels out the door. So I know I'm at least producing 3 to 4 novels worth of work a year, and that's not including all the short stories I write. And because short stories are my first love, so I love writing short stories. Um, and so I couldn't tell you how much I do per day. I could just tell you in the course of a year, I produce I typically write about 3 novels worth of words a year. Um, yeah, I typically write about 3 novels, 3 to 4 novels worth of words a year is what I'm doing. As far as my schedule goes, I don't really have a set schedule because I literally I carry my clipboard with me at all times. So at any moment, if I'm out and about and I get bored or there's a quiet time, I would just start writing immediately on whatever project I'm noodling on.
Do you do
But
longhand?
that's during this. Oh yeah,
So like your first
oh
drafts
yeah,
and everything are longhand.
all longhand. Yep.
Oh
And then
wow.
I'll type it into the computer. Then I'll print it out, and then I'll edit longhand also.
So so doing your first in longhand, when you then put it in the computer, is that becoming a second draft in a way where like are you kind of like editing or like making changes as you're doing that, or are you just doing kind of like word for word of what you put down on the
it,
longhand?
it it's a in between because I'm trying to clean stuff up as I go. Well, it's here anymore because of my deadlines are really tight. They definitely become a second draft. I'm just fixing stuff as I go as I input it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so definitely so I think it was like a draft and a half most times though. Now in the summer my schedule's a little different because like I said I'm bound by since I work at a school. Well, my summers are free, and so now my summer schedules, and it's been this way for like last 4 years. I basically write on my front porch from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday is my typical writing schedule, and then I invite neighborhood artists if they want to. They can always just drop by the porch, and they can just work alongside me. That way, we all have company as we doing our respective art practices. So it doesn't, so I'll have visual artists working or some poets working alongside me, and I have a couple friends who will just zoom in, so they'll work on their things while we're all on a Zoom link together, and we just all collectively just work alongside each other, and that's 10 to 2 over the summers.
So you mentioned Usual Suspects. I actually have a copy right here. This is your first
Mhm.
middle grade book.
Oh yeah.
And the back says, I've been accused of a lot of things, some worse than others, but this here, hiding a gun near the school, it's beyond me. It's criminal. It's basically about these two friends who are kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, troublemakers, who are always kind of getting called in the principal's office, who essentially a gun's been found on the school
Mhm.
grounds, and the principal's basically like, if we don't figure out who it is, we're just going to assume it's one of you guys. And so they kind of become detectives to try to figure out who had brought the gun and why. Um, and then you had a follow-up book, and I know in the green room we were talking, it's kind of like it takes place it doesn't follow the same exact, main characters, but it takes place in the same school. Can you talk about like, I mean, do you have other ideas to kind of continue on, or like, what can you tell us about the
Yeah.
second book?
So the second book is called Unfadable, and I won, I actually won the Indiana Authors Award for that book
Nice,
in
congrats.
2024. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, oddly, that's the second time I won the Indiana Authors Awards. Actually, there they are right behind me. These two things, these two, they look like bricks, and trust me, they are weighted like bricks too. I won the first one for Pimp My Airship and the second one for Unfadable. And and so like with Usual Suspects, the main reason I started writing that was because I wanted to sort of capture the antics of my boys in school, and then give them something to read. And I figured they would love reading about themselves, fictionalized, and that's how Usual Suspects came about. And then when my editor wrote me and said, "Hey, we'd like another book, but we don't want a sequel to Usual Suspect. We just want another middle grade detective book from you." And I'm like, "All right." Well, at the time, one of my former students had come to visit me, and she's looking over my shoulder, and she's like, "Hey, Mr. Broaddus, I bet ideas are hard." And I'm like, "No, ideas are the easy part." So I pitched her as a book, and I looked around the classroom, and I pitched some of her classmates as like, those two, they look like wizard detectives, da 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 da. Like those two, they are da da. So I pitched a series of ideas, but they came back and were like, "This Bella character is fascinating. Can you write a book about her?" And then, but Bella was still sitting over my shoulder. She's like, "Yeah, that Bella character is fascinating. Can you write a story about her?" And so that's how Unfadable came about. And it basically talks about our my mentor relationship with my student and what that looks like. So,
Yeah. And then the most
and then
recent,
yeah,
you have a recent science fiction, I guess, is it a trilogy right now?
yeah.
How did this one come
Man,
about?
uh, completely different process. Um, I was um, I was actually oh, because we were talking in the green room about that Neotext project. Um,
Yes, yes.
so
Yeah,
at
you
at
had
the time,
like the novella?
yeah, it was a novella, and I was actually in New York at the time researching for that novella. I was there for a couple reasons, but one of the things I was there for, I wanted to do some research for that novella, and actually, I think I was still nailing down that deal in particular while I was out there. But I take a picture of myself in front of the Apollo Theater because it's the Apollo Theater. And then an editor reaches out to me and goes, "Wait, are you in New York right now?" And then she was just like, "Hey, you want to go get coffee together?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love that." So so we go, we grab drinks and everything, and then she's like, "Well, pitch me some things. What do you think about writing?" And so I talk about I mentioned Pimp My Airship at the time, and then I mentioned Lost Griot at the time, and I could tell those weren't really landing with her. And then I'm just like, well, I'm thinking about writing this novel based about some young women from the hood, in space with guns. That's about as far out as I had thought. I'm pulling this pitch out my behind. Um, and she's like, "Well, tell me more." And then so I start, I had been literally been noodling with this short story idea about them, and so I do a little pitch about this military unit out exploring space. So basically, a cadre of women Marines, space Marines, basically out in space exploring things. And she was like, "If you send me an outline, I think we can move forward with that project." And so then I, reach out to my agent. I'm just like, "Hey, I'm sort of feeling myself like all I got to do, I just came up with an idea, and all I got to do is, put together an outline." And she said she'd move forward with it. And my agent's like, "Well, of course you did. It's a good idea. So what you're going to do, going to write that outline, write me 3 sample chapters, and then you're going to give it to me, not to her." And so I did that. And then it goes to auction. And so there are
Nice.
like 5 publishers bidding on this project.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the first time that ever happened to me. And my wife is just ecstatic because she's watching, these different bids and stuff coming in. But like with each bid, I'm like retreating more and more into the corner, and like I'm basically in a ball in the corner. And she's
A
like,
lot of
"What is
pressure then,
wrong with you
especially
right
because you
now?"
haven't
And
written
I'm
the
just like,
entire book, right? It was just those chapters
"I did
in the
right," and
outline.
exactly. I'm like, they are bidding on a trilogy that does not exist. And I do not know what to do with that. And you're right, the pressure was already getting to me. No one's even signed a contract, but I'm just already locked into, oh no, what have I done? This is a horrible, horrible turn of events. And it literally wasn't until a friend of mine, Dr. Cheshire Berg, she was just like, you do know they're not bidding on the books. They're bidding on you. They're bidding on whatever it is you come up with. So as long as you come up with something, it's a no-lose situation because that's what they're bidding on. Then that helped calm me down. I'm just like, oh yeah, so yeah, I can come up with something. So all right, we'll just go forward with that.
So do you
So,
typically outline, or I mean, what type of writer, again, I always hate the term pantser or
hmm
plotter, but I mean, what do you like, how do you typically approach, and has it always kind of been that way, or has that evolved over the years since started writing your first book?
yeah, I think I've always generally been a plotter, um, which ironically, it's weird because like plotting is I consider my weakest area as a writer. I'm actually not a great plotter, but I do realize I typically start there. I create characters, create world, then create a structure for all of them to go play in. Um, and so yeah, but then and then that's been actually more enhanced the further I've had to go in my career because of situations like this where they're like, no, send us an outline. Um, so then I have to work out the story in advance, even though I actually consider it more, and I actually think it's more true than not for all of us, that we're actually more of a hybrid than we are clearly plotters or clearly pantsers. Because, I will turn in an outline and we can bid and people can, we'll sign the deal based on an outline, but I'm like, the outline is what I call the lie we're all agreeing to
Yeah.
because there is no guarantee once I start to write that I'm sticking anything where close to this outline.
Hmm.
Uh, but the outline's job is to show that I can, there is a story there with a beginning, middle, and end that I know how to get to if need be. But I also look at outlines as they are a tool. They're not a lock, they're not something I'm locked into. It's a tool to help me keep writing. So that when I do go on my adventures writing and discovering what these characters are doing, that when I do get stuck, I can actually go back to the outline and go, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be. No, got it. Or what happens more times than not is that the outline is good to about the halfway mark of my project. Because once I get to the halfway mark, I'm usually so far off the page that I'm like, and now time to replot from where I am now to see if I can still get to an ending from this point. So it's just a tool for me. But yeah, I'm definitely
Um,
more of a plotter.
yeah. So like, I mean, typically do you usually have the end in sight on that outline, or you're kind of like, this is the direction I'm going? I mean, are there times where and forgive me, usually I'm talking to like, crime thriller writers where it's like, do you know
Mhm.
who the killer's going to be at the end or whatever else? I mean, like
Well,
how far out do you know kind of what
uh,
that ending is going to be?
so I will tell you this then. So obviously with book one of the trilogy, so book one is Sweep of Stars, and obviously that was outlined. But in Sweep of Stars, there's one of the threads in there is a murder mystery, right? Because one of the characters gets killed, and no one knows who does it, and I don't reveal. And by the time you get to the end of book one, that thread has not been resolved because I have a whole trilogy to write. Um, it was only when I was halfway through writing book two with Breath of Oblivion, I turned to my assistant. I'm like, I figured out who killed that character in book one, and he's like, you didn't know who killed them when you wrote it, and I'm like, no, I figured we'd figure it out, at some point. And he's like, oh, so you're gonna reveal it in book two? And I'm like, no, 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 I'm not gonna reveal the killer till book three, but I figured it out in book two. So yeah, so I just gotta see how things go. But like I said, that gets me through Breath of Oblivion. They just announced that book three is City Dreaming, like literally just yesterday. They dropped the cover for A City Dreaming and the publishing date, which is apparently March 31st next year. So they just dropped that a bit of
Are
information,
you
and
are
so
you done with that book? Like, have you turned it in?
I turned in the rough draft. That way my editors know I haven't been just completely jacking around. But I literally just today, what, no, just yesterday when I saw that it was coming out in March, I was just like, time to get started on revisions, you know. So that's literally what I have printed out right now is the revision. I have chapter one sitting right here as a for me to start doing my revisions on.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're coming
but
up
yeah,
on an
but then
yeah.
oh yeah. Oh no, no, last thing I was gonna say was that with the ending, because you know now you're talking the ending of a trilogy, not just the shorts, not just the novel.
Yeah.
And so I had no idea how I was going to get to this point. And so that was the big struggle with book three, because I have all these threads and like how do I pull them all together, and then how do I pull this all together? What does the ending look like? And that's a complete adventure. You
Yeah.
know, it wasn't quite pantsing, but it was a complete adventure, you know, trying to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to keep
Mm,
much more of your time, but I do
mm.
want to talk about you have a story in the upcoming I don't know, is it like a tribute anthology? I mean, what would we call it? It's basically like the story set in Stephen King's The Stand, which
Right,
I think is
right.
probably going to be in terms of anthologies. Do you remember the 999 anthology that came out, I think back in like I think 1999 or like 2000?
Right. I don't, but you're the second person to bring up a comparison to that anthology. No, go ahead. Go
Because
ahead.
it just felt like it was like one of those like big anthologies, you know what I mean? I kind of feel like
Hmm.
the publisher at that time, and there was a lot of huge authors in it. I feel like they
Hmm.
really kind of pushed that, and I'm getting the sense that there's going to be a lot of traction with anthology. So, um, you have a story in it, and I remember when Keen told me, like, yeah, Maurice has a story in it. He's like, he wrote it with Wayne Brady, and I'm like, you mean Wayne Brady's gonna choke a bitch, Wayne Brady? That Wayne Brady? No, I didn't say that, but of course I was like, of course Maurice wrote it with Wayne Brady. So can you tell kind of like how, I mean, talk a little bit about the story. You did talk about it at AuthorCon. There was a panel about that. I mean, obviously
Hmm.
we don't want to kind of spoil things, but it's
Right,
a
right,
very unique take. And essentially, and again, this is what Keen told me, and you can either, say this is true or false.
right, right,
You guys basically had to get permission from King to write this particular story because of what you wanted to do. So I don't know where you want
yeah,
to kind of take that because again, like
yeah,
we don't want to do spoilers or whatever, but what can you
right,
kind
right,
of, you know, uh, kind of like whet people's appetite for like what's coming up in a
right,
couple of months?
right. So, so yeah, so I'm literally at Brian's wedding because I was the officiant for Brian's wedding, and then that's when he invites me to this anthology, and so like I'm at the reception, and I'm
To
like,
be
all right.
fair, during the ceremony, you paused halfway through and was like, and Brian, you're gonna put me in the anthology, right?
Right, right, yeah, exactly. There you go.
It was
This is,
very
you always
awkward,
want to
quite
pitch,
honestly.
right?
Everybody was very, very, very
You
yeah,
got to
it
choose
was
your
they were
moments
very
to pitch an
uncomfortable.
editor, boys and girls. But yeah, so I literally I called Wayne at the time, and I'm like, hey, would you be
Well,
interested in
first of all,
writing
how do
the
you just
story
know
with
Wayne
me?
Brady? Are you guys friends? Like, how long have you known Wayne?
I think at that point we'd been friends for about a year. So, and this is the craziest thing because he was doing some research on Afrofuturism, and fell down this rabbit hole, and then ran across my name, and came across and found Knights of Breton Court. So he reads that book, falls in love with it, and then starts tweeting at me that he's a fan. And uh and you know, and I think I screen captured that tweet, to be honest with you. And then no one could talk to me for a week because I'm just like, Wayne Brady said he's a fan of mine. So I'm walking around the house and my wife's like, you knew you're being catfished, right? You do know you're being catfished. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, no, there was a blue mark and everything. She goes, nah, you're being catfished. And then he reaches out and is like, hey, you know, would you ever have time to chat with me about some ideas and stuff? And I'm like, sure. And so then we hop on Zoom, and I'm sitting there. You know how it's like waiting to be let into the waiting room, and I'm like, please be Wayne Brady, please be Wayne Brady, please be Wayne Brady, because I'm not going to hear the end of it if my wife is right.
Yeah.
Um, and
At
sure
that point, he
enough,
wasn't asking for your social security number and stuff, right?
correct, exactly, exactly. So it turns out it was Wayne. Turns out he and I are would just say very alike. He's such a nerd and such a well-read nerd at that. Like anyone I would mention, he would reach off camera and then come back with the book and go, "You mean this person?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. So you're one of us. Got it." Um, so that's how our friendship started, and we've just been, yakking ever since. Um, but then I call him up and I'm like, "Hey, would you be interested in writing a story with me for Stephen King's anthology, Stephen King, a story for Stephen King's The Stand?" And he's like, "Shut up." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm serious." He's like, "You know what we have to do, right?" And I'm like, "I think I already know, but who are you gonna say?" He's like, "We got to do Mother Abigail." I'm like, "Yep, that's where I'm at." And so he and I start, pitching ideas back and forth about what we want to do with Mother Abigail. And so then we pitch Brian and Chris on this idea that we have. And then and they're like, "Well, we like the idea, but we forgot to tell you the rules of the anthology is no one can use any of the original cast members in their story. So if so to do that, we'd have to get permission. Stephen King wouldn't sign out. Like basically that's the rules." And I'm like, "Well, we'll come up with a different idea." And then he's like, "No, no, we're not saying no. We're saying we would have to get Stephen King's permission." Oh wait, hang on. He did say that. We'll have to get Steve's permission uh to do that, because to them he's Steve, to me he's still Mr. King, but to them, it's Steve. So I'm like, "All right, well, y'all get Steve's, y'all see what Steve thinks, and me and Wayne will come up with a plan B." So me and Wayne start coming up with a plan B of what we'd like to do in this world. And actually we come up with a really strong idea of what a really strong plan B. And I'm like, "Oh, I think I kind of like our plan B better than our plan A." um but then Brian comes back and says, uh "Steve says there is no one he would trust more with this character than you two." And I'm like, "Well, well, I guess we're doing the Mother Abigail story." And then we still put in elements of our plan B because we really like some of those elements. But yeah, so we ended up writing a Mother Abigail story. And to whet appetites without spoilers, there comes a point in The Stand where Mother Abigail leaves. Leaves the compound, and then she's just missing for weeks, and everybody's kind of thrown off, and then she returns after going through something. We write about that something.
Yeah. Yeah, and you had brought up during that panel, and I forget how it came about, but you had brought up about Stephen King's Desperation.
Mm, yeah.
Is that I mean, and I think you had said before that that was a book that really spoke to you. Again, this has been, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like it was actually what, it was only like a month ago, I think, or
It was only
whatever,
a
but
couple months
like it
ago,
feels
right?
like a
Right.
long time now. In,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, when Trump's president, time really slows down for me.
Time
But,
time moves funny.
but yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, do you want to talk real quick the time we have remaining about Desperation? Because I
Yeah.
would say, in terms of in terms of King books, that's one of my favorites. And not only like is it a really great book, and I don't think people really talk about this, but structure wise, and I would love to
Mm.
have a conversation with him or read somewhere about how this happened. Like it's broken up into five parts. Every part has five chapters. Every chapter has five sub chapters. You know what I mean? Like
Right,
just
right.
it's a very interesting because then also it is, it was published along with Regulators, which did not have that type of structure.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was just very interesting because I don't think he's ever really done that with any other novel where it was
Right.
just this 555. And I, just yeah. Anyway, that's a complete
Yeah.
aside. But if in the back of my head, like especially as a writer who write, you're always thinking about like I don't know about you, at least for me, as like a thriller crime writer, I try to keep the shorter chapters the better.
Right.
But
Right.
and for whatever reason, I also do not like ending a novel on a like odd number chapter. Unless it's like, a 25 or 35 or something like that. Like,
Right.
just
Right.
like ending on a chapter 77 or 79, just, I don't know, it feels weird. I'd rather end on chapter 80. That's just
Right.
me. But
Okay, got you. Um, Well, I mean, I've through our conversation, you've heard me say things like, well, MoCon started as a church ministry, and um, and all these different aspects of faith that sort of creep up in my work and into my life and everything. Well, because I grew up in the church, have a very strong faith background. But one of the things I was wrestling with early in my writing career was, I am a person of faith, um, but I don't know what that means and what that would look like in my writing. How do I, you know, how do I do, how do I put that worldview into my work without it being some sort of proselytizing piece? Because because one of the decisions I had to make early on was like, do I want to be a horror writer or do I want to be a Christian horror writer? Because of two different paths. Um, if I'm going to go down that road, but I'm like, no, I want to be a horror writer. But now I'm still a Christian, so what does that mean for my writing? And I had no concept of what that could look like for me. Um, and literally until I read Stephen King's Desperation. Because you have this tale of this young boy with this very vibrant, very real faith, and how that faith is used to defeat this evil sheriff that's menacing this town. And you have this sub theme of you're either in a state of faith or you're in a state of desperation that's going on in this book. And so the storytelling works on so many different levels, without feeling like faith was being shoved down your throat, right? It was just a part of that character, something, a very real worldview this character has that they wrestle with. It wasn't a simple, or saccharine sort of faith. It was something that even the character wrestles with, especially in light of this evil that is triumphing, through the course of this book. And that taught me so much about what it means to be a writer who has faith, who wrestles with things in his writing. I mean, Stephen King wrestles with so many faith issues over the course of his work, which I just find fascinating. Also, and again, one of those things where like I'd love to have a conversation with him to talk about the nature of that wrestling that he does in his work. But it was very instructive for me to see, all right, you know what, you can do this thing where it's like, no, the object, the goal isn't to proselytize. The object is to tell a good story. The object is to create very real characters, and your real characters believe things, and it's okay for them to believe things. Um, and as long as those things serve the greater function, which is telling the story. So if you're doing your job as a writer, you can do all these things to it. So
Yeah. I don't know if it was C.S. Lewis, or I don't know if I'm attributing the quote to him, but something along the lines of we don't need more Christian writers, we need more writers who are Christians, or something along
yeah,
those lines. Because I mean,
yeah,
growing up, I mean, it's been a very, very long time, but growing up, I had read some, you got like Frank Peretti, and you got some other
yeah.
authors that were specifically published by like, religious publishing houses
Hmm.
that happen to be maybe considered thrillers or mysteries or whatever else.
Right,
But it all kind of, I don't know, it just seemed like they were very much like always like, you had like a non-believing protagonist who then eventually, becomes a
right,
believer.
right.
It's like, and they become
Yeah,
kind of just predictable and whatever,
yep,
as opposed to, I mean, you always wonder like if another writer had written The Stand, again, because it's Stephen King, and he, at that point, I mean, he was, still a huge, huge author, like, you know,
mhm,
was he getting away with it because he was Stephen King? Like, had anybody else wrote that book, would they be like, oh, well, this is just like a religious book? You know what I mean?
right, right. Yep. Yeah, no, and in fact, it's funny you say Frank Peretti because, like, early in my career, especially my on the church side of things, everybody's like, "Oh, so you're going to be the next Frank Peretti?" And da 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 da. And I'm like, "Yeah, no," but I understand that that's all you have to compare me to,
Yeah.
and that's how you have to conceptualize me. And then if I had pursued being a Christian writer, that's the exact lane I would have been down. And
I,
and I could have had a fair amount of success in that route because there were several publishers that were recording me for exactly that reason. I'm black and Christian, and that's a completely uncharted lane. They really, so it's just like, but no, it's not the route I want to go down. So
yeah. And I always felt like, I'd be very curious to know like how many copies his books have sold. Because at least growing up, it felt like he was like, this huge seller. Because it was always like, in churches and everything else. Like it
yep,
was, basically the alternative to Stephen King or or these other like,
exactly.
evil horror writers. So, real
Right,
quick,
right.
going back to the story you wrote with Wayne Brady, was that the first time you collaborated with somebody on anything?
No, no. Actually, I collaborate a lot. Um,
Okay.
and I can't even remember my first collaboration. Um, yeah, I can't even remember my first one, but like even like right now, I'm collaborating on a story with a local poet, at right literally right now. And in fact, this is my so me and Wayne, we also wrote a story for Jonathan Mayberry.
Yeah.
It's part
So
of
when you are
as a thing
collaborating,
in his
is
world.
it,
Hmm.
and now obviously everything is probably, every story. I mean, is the experience like, are you doing a draft and then they're doing a draft, or are you coming up with an idea and then, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah,
or
yeah,
is that kind of the same across the board, or
yeah.
is obviously just a case by case basis? It's a little bit
You know
different.
what? Now that I think about it, I think my first collaboration might have been with Wrath James White. Now that I think about it, because we did a novella called Orgy of Souls together.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
remember that.
I remember one of the things he said, which has always been instructive to me, but he was like, "We need to write a story that neither one of us could write on our own."
Oh, I like that.
I do too. And then plus it allows us to do things like I got to play in his sandbox, he got to play in my sandbox in terms of writing style and everything. So that was a huge part of it. And then, but the actual collaboration part, it depends on. I think it's different with each collaborator. So it's like, so partly it's about what are each other's strengths, and then partly it's about what the process is going to look like. Like me and Wrath, we just literally would just write till you get to a point, and then okay, not just any point. We would try to write the other person into a corner, and then go, and now get out of this. And so then, so he'd do that. Then I'd write him into a corner and say, aha, get out of that. And so we did that back and forth. And so I think you can really feel that energy during the course of that novella. It's like, these two are just, these idiots are just trying to stick it to each other in the best possible ways.
Yeah.
But sometimes I write with like, I think I've written two stories, I think, at least two stories with like some of my former middle school students. Well, no, I think they might have still, no, they had just graduated middle school, and we collaborated on stories. And so the process looks a little different. So they would write some parts, I would write some parts. It just depends on what does each person bring to the table.
Yeah. Uh, just last thing. So with particularly Wayne Brady, has he written other fiction, or is this kind of his very going to be his first like fiction debut?
It's not his debut because when we talked, he'd written for Marvel. He'd written for like
Okay.
one of the
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
he'd
You know
written
what? Let's talk
an
about that
annual.
real quick. You had written
Oh yeah,
some
yeah.
stuff for Marvel, right? It was Black
Oh yeah,
Panther.
yeah. Yeah, I've written a Black Panther short story. I just had a Captain America short story come out, and then I wrote a Black Panther book.
When you are doing essentially, I mean, these are considered, I guess, for lack of a better word, work for hire. I mean, it's someone else's IP,
Mhm.
you're doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
do you feel like is there nervousness to that? I mean, I'm sure there's nervousness, but like what type of restrictions were there? I mean, were there any types of things where the editors or Marvel are basically like, or like come back later and be like, no, 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 you can't do this with this character, or like this character's not allowed to do this.
Right. Yes. But there's no nervousness to it. And I think one of the reasons why there's no nervousness to it is because, you can't see the rest of my office, but if I was to turn my camera the other way, you would see this massive wall of comic books. So like I said, I started collecting comic books in fifth grade. I've just been reading them ever since. And so I'm a huge comic book nerd. So, um, which was part of the way why I got the gig in the first place. Um, and so yeah, so these are characters I love anyway. So it's easy for me to come up with stories, and they're basically the only rules were everything you wrote had to come from comic book lore. You couldn't just pull it from the MCU, for example, but you had to be able to basically cite your sources in the comic books themselves. And I'm
Mm.
like, no problem. And then when I turned in the Black Panther story, then they came back with a couple different notes, which I found interesting because one was no Marvel character smokes. And I'm just like, that's interesting because I could have sworn Ben Grimm and Wolverine smoke cigars all the time. But apparently at some point they just stopped smoking. So
Yeah.
characters don't smoke in Marvel. And so I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then and I also used the Dora Milaje um, but I used Dora Milaje from the comic books, and they were like, "Yeah, we're actually getting away from how they were portrayed in the comic books, and we actually are leaning on how they were portrayed in the movies. We're actually moving the Dora Milaje to be more like they were in the movies." And I'm just like, "Okay." So I had to make some adjustments there, but that's pretty much the Yeah, those are pretty much the only kind of things that they came back on me with, because after that, it's just I'm just there to demonstrate my nerd knowledge at that point.
Nice, nice. All right, Maurice, you've been very kind with your time. Before you go, is there anything you want to, any shout outs, like, I don't know, like, TV, movie, books, or anything you've like watched or read recently that you've enjoyed?
Let's see, TV shows. I'm looking forward to watching Andor. Not gonna lie, I'm a big fan of season one.
Oh,
Looking forward to season
dude,
two.
how far, like, how far back are you? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, are you up with this new season that just ended?
No, I haven't watched it yet. I'm looking forward to binging it in
Oh my
fairly short
God,
order.
it's so
Uh,
good.
but see,
It's so good.
the problem is that I got to make sure that I have to watch it in spaces when I'm not working on the trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm since I'm but now that I have the rough draft done, I'm good. So I'm like, yeah, close enough. I can indulge in Andor.
So you might already
And then
know this, but
also
if
there was a
not,
show.
the second season,
Okay.
if you're not going to be like binge the entire thing, try to probably watch in 3 episode batches because each one is a year that is leading up
Oh,
to
interesting.
what becomes Rogue One.
Okay, that is good to know.
Yeah.
That is good to know. There was a show on Netflix called The Diplomat, which
Oh yeah. It was just renewed for a fourth
I
season. The
oh, it
third season
did.
hasn't even come
So
out yet.
okay, good. Because yeah, because when I got to the ending of season two, I was just like,
Oh, that
they
was a great ending.
so great, and I'm just like, okay, I am here for it. So that'd
Especially because
be on
like
the TV
I feel
side.
like nowadays especially if you watch a lot of TV, you can usually predict what's going to happen or how it's
Yeah.
going to. I felt that ending was so well done that when the
Hmm.
reveal came out, you were like, holy shit, like what?
Right. That was and yeah, I was sold on that show. I love that show. And then movie wise, Sinners.
Mm.
My life is
I haven't
about
seen it
sinners.
yet, but because I missed the IMAX window in our area, and I'm like,
Okay.
I
Oh,
don't want to go to a
it's
regular
coming back.
theater now. But yeah, I'm waiting for that on digital.
It's coming back. Oh no, it's coming back to IMAX.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
know it is in
Yeah.
select, but I mean, my area, I'm not sure if it's going to, but I
Oh,
definitely want to
oh,
say,
gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
it's incredible that, I mean, I mean, nowadays, anything that's like non-superhero and anything making over $100 million is, and this is original, Ryan did this. And so like, yeah, no,
Right.
it's incredible.
Yeah. Yep. So, all right. Well, I'm excited for you to go see. I'm when it comes back on IMAX, I think I'm gonna go see it again on IMAX.
And if anybody hasn't seen it, like Ryan, he does this so very like nerdy, geeky thing where he talks about the different like film ratios of like the different scenes,
Hmm.
and it like makes
Yep.
you then want to then go out of your way to go find it in one of those IMAX theaters where you're seeing it in all
Right.
these different like
Yep.
ratios. What about reading wise? Any good bookstores?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of what I'm doing. I'm reading Chain Gang All Stars right now.
Oh yeah,
I'm
that's
really
good.
liking that.
I saw him. He was up here in Harrisburg at a local indie, and someone had asked
Uh,
him, "What did they say? How far into it are you?"
I think I just passed the third, over a third of the way in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear, but basically, he had someone at the end when they were doing the Q&A. Some guy had stood up and was like, What should I tell people?" Or like, what was it? Basically, it was like, what do you say about when people are making the comparisons to just the Hunger Games?
Oh,
And he was like, yeah. Like he didn't really have a good answer because it's like, I mean, and of course, you saw the articles recently where people are like, oh, the long walk coming out. That's just like, the Hunger Games. And I was like, it was published like fucking like 40 years ago or whatever.
right,
Like,
right.
you know what I mean? Like, like anything can then be compared to the Hunger Games, which there's so many different things out there, like even like Battle Royale and stuff. But yeah, no, that's
Hmm.
such a fascinating. Have you ever read his short story collection, Friday Black?
No, but I'm
I
writing that down
I
right
think you would
now.
dig it. It's a really good short story collection. Yeah, that was his very first thing. And he had talked about how, I mean, he published that back when he was in his, like, I think, like late 20s. You know how, like,
Oh, wow.
publishers are, where it's like, you got a really young writer and it became this whole thing. And it was
Hmm.
funny because he talked about how when his collection came out, he was in his 20s and this was a huge deal. And then when his novel came out, he was in his 30s and it was like, no one really cared anymore. about
Right,
like,
right,
it's
right.
always just kind of like, those young authors. But yeah, no, no.
Hmm.
That's a really, really fun book.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but anyway, Maurice, I appreciate
yeah.
you hanging out, taking time. Everybody go check out all of Maurice's books. That original trilogy is now back in print, right?
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
And and of course, you said the third book is going to be coming out in March of next year, so everyone needs to
Yep.
pre-order that. And then, Maurice, if people want to stock you online, where's the best place to do it?
Probably at MauriceBroaddus.com, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, all as Maurice Broaddus, so I'm easy to find.
Awesome. So, all right, everybody, thanks again for hanging out, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
All right.